Ba-da-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-ba. All right. Promoter 101. Promoter 101. Promoter 101. Promoter 101. And Promoter 101. Promoter 101. Promoter 101. Promoter 101. Promoter 101.
Hi, this is Jason Kupperman from Paradigm, and you're listening to Promoter 101.
This is episode 178 of the Promoter 101 podcast. Standing by from Europe, Mr. Luke Pierce.
Why, thank you, Dan. It's very good to be on this, the 178th episode of Promoter 101. In today's show, we're going to have Live Nation Nashville's Brian Traeger hanging out with Dan and I for a deep dive into the current state of business in Music City.
Plus, turn the tables with AEG Presents Adam Stroul.
And off we go. Episode 178 of Promoter 101 starts right now.
Becca Leifer, Operations Manager at Forest Hills. I'm on Promoter 101.
Well, the word is out. You know it's going to happen. It's getting closer and closer as it's 178 on our way to 200. The podcast is coming to an end very, very soon. But you can be with us for that final interview in beautiful Nashville, Tennessee at the AIBA conference.
That is right. AIBA is just around the corner. It's going to be October 27th. To the 29th at the JW Marriott in Music City, Nashville, Tennessee. And we are looking forward to wrapping up this podcast with so many of our friends in attendance. It's going to be a very special one, and we're working to make sure it's going to be our best one yet. So if you haven't already, get online, go to IEBA, that's AIBA.org. Get registered for the conference before it sells out, because it will sell out. See us there, grab a badge, see us on Sunday. Looking forward to it.
If you got something you want to share with us, hey, just email us at steiny@promoter101.net. We'll talk to you. We love talking about the music industry, and anytime any of the listeners want to talk to us about the podcast, it just brings a smile to our faces.
It certainly does. We like to hear about it wherever you want to talk about it. So if you want to talk to us on social media, join the conversation. We're all over Twitter. I'm W. Luke Pierce. Dan is at the Jew. Of course, this show is Promoter 101. Check us out.
You can also find us on Instagram at SteinyPromoter101. Luke is W. Luke Pierce, and I am Dan Presents.
On Facebook, of course, we're Promoter 101, and we're on the World Wide Web at Promoter101.com. Plus, you can find us where all the cool kids are on LinkedIn, Promoter 101. And this week, Dan, sad to say, because it did sell 3 years after being sold to Verizon for $1.1 billion, Tumblr was recently sold by Verizon for reportedly $3 million. So I don't think that service is going to be around much longer. But if you're still on it, check it out at Promoter 101. Rest in peace, Tumblr.
I am Barbara Hubbard.
Mark Campana.
Ted Heinig.
Skip Richmond.
Nick Miller.
Joshua Knight.
Darren Rosen.
Brian Hill.
Greg Wolf.
Darren Zimmerman.
Scott Jampino.
Jason Bernstein.
And I'm on Promoter 101.
The greatest podcast in all the land.
Dan, let's celebrate some birthdays for the week of August 20th to 26, 2019.
Tuesday, August 20th, Kara Finkenberg. Very special lady. Happy birthday.
On Wednesday, the 21st, we are wishing a happy birthday to the man himself, Steve Goodis, Gus Brandt, and Topher Christensen.
Thursday, 8/22, Adam Cook.
On Friday, the 23rd, wishing a happy birthday to my tall Hebrew friend, Mr. Rand Levy.
Saturday, 8/24, John Waldman, Scott Kernahan, the good old Nashville boy himself.
On Sunday, August 25th, Kevin Morrow, Rube Behrens, Mitchell Carduna, and C3's Jen Adams.
Monday, 8/26, Cindy Collins, Chris Zitterbart, Harry Levy, and Shane Turlin.
Wishing everybody this week wonderful happy birthdays from the gang here at Promoter 101.
Hey, this is David Britz from Works Entertainment, and you are listening to Promoter 101.
Promoter 101 Flashbacks.
Episode 18.
Mark Geiger.
So between the time that Artist Direct popped up and you leaving Triad, what did you do in that space in between?
There wasn't any time. I left. I went
can't
to
be
work
right.
for Rick Rubin at American Recordings, and I was part of the executive team running his company. I learned the record business. So I did that for 5 years, and that's where I conceived Artist Direct. So I left Triad to go in the record business.
And you thought you were done being an agent at that point?
I thought I was done being an agent, and I went to learn other things. Agents and promoters both had a negative perception in the music ecosystem. No longer has that. But at the time, agents and promoters were like outside the business, and it was all record companies and things like that. And I was a little irritated by that, and I wanted to get on that side and learn that business. And I had Seymour Stein, Rick Rubin, and Gary Kerfurst, all good friends and mentors, and I decided to go work for Rick and learn the record business.
And it's fair, at the time that you're talking about, the early 90s, promoters had a very bad reputation in the music industry, too.
I think the whole live side of the business was treated as the bottom of your shoe.
Used car salesman kind of
and
vibe.
Lowly esteemed, I guess if that's the right way to say it, position. And that was not for a young guy who had some altruistic thoughts and thought he could bring something to this. I didn't like that. I wanted to get into it and be in a more of a influential position. And I did that for 5 years, and the internet really was starting to blow up. So I spent time with Rick, learned the business, learned a lot of things. He was fantastic. We signed Johnny Cash, made that Chili Peppers, Blood Sugar Sex Magic, did all kinds of interesting things, signed bands, worked in the Warner system, watched Warner's get decimated at the time. A whole bunch of things went down that I benefited from. But the biggest one was really finding all those properties on the internet, buying the Ultimate Band List, UBL.com, conceiving Artist Direct, and starting that next phase.
Okay, and it's fair to say that you came to Polestar as the internet was happening and told the entire industry, own your websites, or some kid is going to own them out of a bedroom that's in high school until you figure this out. You were the first one to say that to the industry.
I said a lot more than that, but you're correct. I tried to get the whole music ecosystem to pay attention to what I thought was to come, which was a major change in the world. And ironically, there were 3 phases, right? You try to pass on knowledge that you think is good for everybody, right? Phase 1 was in 2000 when the market crashed. We went public and everything fell apart.
Your timing was just interesting on that.
On the IPO, but anybody who was in the internet in 2000 went from hero to goat. I mean, anybody. Mary Meeker, Jeff Bezos, everybody. That was the first phase where you felt, oh shit, I shouldn't have opened my mouth and talked so big about what was to come because people are really handing it back to you, right? So as I said to people, I felt like Christopher Columbus having sailed around the world twice, got back to Genoa, and everybody strung me up, on the cross saying, see, I told you the world is flat. That was phase 1. Phase 2 was looking at how society has been changed today, 2017, or any time in the last 5 years, by the internet, mobile devices, etc., and thinking, God damn, I really undersold this. I was screaming from the rooftops, and it's 50 times bigger than I even said it was going to be. And phase 3 is I'm now here back in the agency business. I've been here for a while, and everybody thinks I'm an internet superstar, which is kind of funny for failing, right? Because I ultimately failed at that time because I wasn't, forget that it was far ahead and there was a multi-trillion-dollar market crash in the way. I was also an inexperienced CEO that would have had to last 10 years at least of treading water before the business really started to take off and make money. So it was an interesting evolution of failure, I should say.
Well, I think every part of anybody that's successful has had a little bit of failure anyway.
No question. And I would say, obviously, you're right. The biggest learning, growth spurts, and changes come from failure, not from success. So I learned a lot from it and became a much better business person, leader, etc. But I still lost $63 million and went through it and had to live that whole cycle. So it's an interesting trade-off.
$63 million.
Correct.
I haven't lost that much on a show yet.
Yeah, well, you didn't bet as big.
This is Whitney Bond from 888 Management, reminding you to keep your mazel strong, appearing live on Promoter 101.
It's time to turn the tables. It's time to turn the
tables. Kicking things off in episode 178, we're going to turn the tables with AEG Presents from the Rocky Mountains, Mr. Adam Stroul.
Adam Stroul, fire at will.
Why don't you tell us how you got started in the Colorado market?
I was a drummer, man. I was in a band, and it was hard. There were less clubs for all-age shows, and I was a high school student. And my band wanted to gig, and I knew we couldn't headline because we just didn't have the chops yet, but we wanted experience. So I'd rent out venues like the Gothic from Doug Kaufman, 1,000 seats, and it wasn't redone by Steve yet. It was kind of a pit, man. But, the kind of pit where you could see Cannibal Corpse in, kind of a cool place you couldn't fuck up, and was kind of awesome for that. That's where Ministry played. So I wanted to play that place, so I'd rent it out and I'd get bigger local bands, the headline that would normally only do 21 and over plays, and they'd be stoked to play to my all-age crowd, and I'd fill it with high school students. At the same time, I'd be taking the risk and like trying to fill it in, but my band would get to gig. And I was starting to get pretty good at that, where other bands would be calling me to get on my gigs, and to the point where I didn't want to overplay. So I'd be doing a show once a month and once every other week. And then it became like every weekend, and I was using the Mercury Cafe and the Ozatlan Theater and the Gothic, and I was starting to use Pure Energy in the Springs, and I'd use the Ramskeller in Fort Collins, and I was starting to figure it out. And then local bands were starting to lead to some national acts. But it was like I didn't want to overplay, but I saw that I could do this instead of have a gig, and I was kind of excited about that.
So your goal wasn't exactly to be a promoter; it just kind of happened.
No, I always wanted to be a promoter from the age of 8.
You did?
Yeah, my parents took me to see Tony Orlando and Dawn at the turn of the century, which was a dinner club that was on Hampton and Yosemite, right by Cherokee Reservoir, that closed in the late 80s, but was like the cool dinner room to see shows, Vegas style. Think the Sands, like Rat Pack vibe, booths and stuff. Shauna Na played there, and Donnie Marie. It was like, that was the play. So at 8 years old, I was like, I want to do that. My parents were like, you want to be a performer like Tony Orlando? I'm like, nah, man. I want to be the guy counting the money and back telling the guy to get the fuck on the stage.
The gangster shit.
Yeah. So no, I always knew I wanted to be a concert promoter. I just wasn't exactly sure what my path was going to be. And Barry Fay was a rock star in Denver when I was a kid. The second most famous person in Denver was Barry Fay when he'd go on all the radio stations and all the TV shows to announce the summer lineup of the Red Rock Summer of Stars. Only more important over the newscasters, over Mayor Pena, was John Elway. It was Elway then Barry Fay. Most powerful people in Colorado.
That's pretty amazing.
It was, like being in San Francisco and Bill Graham. People knew who Barry Fay was.
Oh, of course. Huge famous name, a legend in the promoting game. How was your relationship with Barry?
Tricky at best. Look, it was always an odd thing. They were a very aggressive company. They didn't care for competition. They weren't super supportive. I can't say that Barry was ever super outgoing. We had done a couple shows together. I worked with Bill Bass a little bit, who was definitely a little more supportive. Pam Moore she could take or leave me, probably would leave me. But they were cold. Bill was a little bit nicer in general, but I would sell shows out. And at some point I started doing theater shows, and that was leading to small arena shows. And I was sending real offers. And when I was stepping up to the bigger level, I was getting help from Bill Silva and being able to pull off real production and real shows with the help of Bill Silva's San Diego team. And that really kind of changed things, where Barry just didn't acknowledge that I existed for a while.
Yeah.
But I can't say that we'd ever had a harsh word, and he was a good partner when we did shows together. I respected him. I got that it wasn't personal. This was a market he built, and it wasn't like it was any different. It wasn't like him and nobody in particular, him and Guest Presents, and him and the Road Home guys had like great relationships. It was like, you're in my market. What the fuck are you doing in my market? I built this market was always kind of the vibe. So it wasn't like I was special. I was someone else trying to make a living, and any ticket I sold in the market was a ticket he should be selling in the market. It was always the vibe I kind of got.
Yeah. So from Barry, there's Chuck, who's one of my bosses. How's your relationship with Chuck Morris?
I love Chuck, and since I was a kid, I've known Chuck. And growing up in a temple in Colorado as a young Jew, my parents were in the business community. That our families knew each other. Chuck was always supportive, always friendly, outgoing. If you called Chuck, he'd take your call on the first ring. You asked him for advice, he would. At the same time, you wouldn't want to bug Chuck Morris. He's fucking Chuck Morris. He's busy dealing with real acts, real bands, managing Big Head Todd and the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band and Lyle Lovett. You didn't bug Chuck Morris. That guy is busy. And still to this day, I feel a little weird calling him and shooting him an email. But he responds in a second when I do, and he always
he's the
takes
best.
a call. Guy is a super mention. I don't have anything but great things to say about Chuck. He was always super supportive, great advice. Whether we were competing or working together or talking about doing something together, it didn't matter. He would always be genuine and sincere and just, one of those guys that's just good people.
Yeah, big heart, great human being, brightens up the room. So at what point did you start making your way outside of Colorado? And what was the first market that you went into outside of Colorado?
First, I did the Springs in Fort Collins coming out of Denver and was messing with Boulder.
So you were going to the Fox?
I wasn't. Me and Donnie were competing a little bit when I was doing the Mercury and the Ozatlan, and he was doing the Fox. So I didn't really go into the Fox, and it wasn't really something that was made available to me in our competitive sense. I'd go into the Boulder Theater. I did Johnny Cash there. I did Chick Corea.
Wow.
I did Al Di Meola there. You know, I was doing some fun stuff there at Paramount Theater. And then I'd do the Pikes Peak Center in the Springs, or I'd do the Lincoln Center in Fort Collins, and maybe I'd start to mess with the Cheyenne Civic Center. But Salt Lake City and Albuquerque seemed to be like the first markets that I saw it coming too easy. Kansas City had Jeff Fortier, who was a really good promoter, but Salt Lake,
kind of like Denver or somewhere on the Front Range would be an anchor date, and then you'd be like, and I can give you a few more around that.
Right, or even if I wasn't going to get Denver, maybe I'd get a chance to touch the act that was really hot. But, you know, if I found success with the Johnny Cash, then maybe I'd try to do Pope Joy in Albuquerque, or maybe I would try and pop over and do Kingsbury in Salt Lake City, which I did in both cases with Johnny Cash.
Amazing.
But it's one of those things where it was like, okay, I could figure out how to do it here. Let's replicate it there. It's like, I can get 3 dates. Let's do that. And at some point it was like, okay, this is working. I'm getting this. So Colorado, Salt Lake, Albuquerque, and learning the difference between the three markets. Because Denver, if Denver's going to do 1,000 people, Albuquerque's probably going to do 650. Salt Lake's probably going to do 700. And you can kind of figure the percentages out almost like that as a given. And it's pretty solid, but thinking that you can pay Denver money in Salt Lake or Albuquerque is a no-no. You know, you can pay Phoenix money in Denver and vice versa. You can pay the same thing in Seattle and get away with it, but you can't in Portland. You know, it's like knowing that you can pay bands 70% in Sacramento what you pay them in Seattle or fucking San Francisco is something you got to learn over time.
And Denver is kind of its own crazy little island. I think bands probably get their biggest paydays in Denver.
Well, in a lot of cases, especially when the promoters start bidding it up like mad. The island of man, money just grows on trees that you guys have made in Denver for the agents has existed long before you got in the game. You got to come with the dollars there, and you got to come with the right play and the right market.
And it's also a testament to the music community in Colorado, how supportive they are, and the fans are hardcore, and that's kind of, you know, what people in Colorado do. They go to shows.
Thank fucking God, huh?
Yeah, right?
Promoter 101, turning the tables with Adam Stroul, right here in the Bay of San Francisco.
Peace.
Mr. Stroul will be back this coming Thursday for a full interview right here on Promoter 101.
Hey there, this is Andy Gould, CEO at Spectacle Entertainment, Promoter 101.
Dan, it's Monday, so that means it's time for the Promoter 101 Badass of the Week. Tell me who we got.
You know, this one goes out to the guys behind the guys, the road crews that keep us all in check, making it happen. There'd be no show if it wasn't for the techs and the hands and all of the guys that live on the road day and night that just get none of the credit. So to represent all of those great men and women out there, our hats off this week to Kai Griffin, to represent the thousands upon thousands of hands and techs that get us through these industry days. The industry would be nothing without you. We want to recognize you as the face behind all of the men and women behind the bands that make us all happen. This week, Kai is our Badass of the Week.
Dan, there's hard to argue with any of that. There are so many people behind the scenes that make us look good, and we are so thankful for all the hard work they put in and day out. So this week, congratulations, Kai. It's a well-deserved Promoter 101 Badass of the Week.
Yo, this is Tommy Lee. Yeah, that T Lee. And you're listening to Promoter 101. Fucking turn this shit up, bitches.
In our feature interview for this week's episode, we've got Live Nation Nashville's Brian Traeger, who sat down with Dan and I over the summer for a deep dive into the current state of the Nashville music business scene. And between now and then, we're going to maybe have to get a little story from Mr. Traeger at some point here. He also had his very first hole-in-one in golf. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it. So if you see Traeger after this interview airs, make sure you ask him about how it went at Old McDonald.
All right, sitting here in Music City with one of my favorite people from Live Nation, joining us on Promoter 101, Brian Traeger. Welcome, buddy.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you guys.
Yeah. How you doing on this beautiful Wednesday morning?
Good. Got out of the Vampire Weekend show around midnight and got up early, and here we are.
Got after it. We spent some time with Brian last night at a Vampire Weekend show at the Ascend Amphitheater here in Nashville. Enjoyed the hospitality and a great show last night. That's one of the many things you're keeping busy with here in Nashville. In addition to your roles as president here of Live Nation Nashville, you're working at shows at Ascend, Ryman, some of the best venues here in America. But let's start with how you got here, because you've got a really interesting track history through the House of Blues system and your time in Philadelphia and LA and Chicago before that. So let's start it off. How did you get started off in this business?
Sure. So when I was in college at Northwestern, I had done a series of internships, and one of them was at House of Blues in Chicago. And I was Michael Yerke and Mary Claire and John Reen's intern. Obviously, they're all still with Live Nation. I just done it after doing an internship at Morgan Stanley, Dean Witter, and I thought it would be fun. After the internship was over, I stayed on, did some like college street team work for them. 9/11 was my senior year. And Michael, I would come down to pick up flyers and just hang out with Mary Claire and John and Michael, and we would catch up. And they asked me what I was doing after college. And I said, well, that's kind of TBD, because with 9/11 happening, I think it was something like 30 or 40% of the recruiters that came to campus were not coming that year. So the plan was to be a bleacher bum at Wrigley for the summer and then move to Colorado and ski for that season and then hit the reset button. And Michael had said to me, well, had you ever thought about going in the music industry? And I was like, look, I think it'd be great, but I know the barrier to entry is incredibly difficult. And, you know, my mom's a school teacher, my dad works in the printing industry, and you guys are my only relationships. And, you know, Michael had said, well, when you come down to pick up flyers, let's send out your resume. So he'd send it out to the agency group and CAA and William Morris. And then he was also introducing me to like industry people in Chicago. He introduced me to a guy named Rick Cooper, who worked for Jeff McCluskey and Associates in Chicago, which at the time was the largest independent record promotion company.
And they were doing a lot of radio shows too, right? Rob Buswell was there at the time?
Rob Buswell was there, but wasn't. I think Rob actually had officially left, but was still working with the company. So he'd started his own company. Like, I remember Rob and I doing a radio show in Syracuse together in like 2003. But he introduced me to Rick, and Michael said, look, you may not be able to get a full-time job right away. So I went and I interned at JMA that summer after I graduated and did Monday through Friday. And then on the weekends, I would caddy at Shore Acres in Chicago to actually make some money. And then basically my lease was coming up. Jeff was saying that he wanted to hire me. And that was right around the time where there were substantial changes in like ad rates. So there was a lot going on in the independent record promotion world. And Jeff just said, I need you to be patient. And then I got to a point where I was crashing on someone's couch. And I was like, look, I'm going to move back to Pennsylvania. I'm going to set up some interviews in New York. And if you can help me, that's great. But appreciate the time and go. And then he was able to offer me a full-time job, like basically in September. And then I worked there for a year and a half. And Yerke and I had been playing basketball together for, you know, like every Thursday at the old Hoops gym, which is now like the West Loop Athletic Club. He told me there was an opportunity in LA with Kevin Morrow, and that Walter Coffey, who was his longtime assistant of like 8 years, was leaving, and Kevin was looking and hadn't found anybody. So Kevin and I had a phone interview, and he said, all right, well, I need to get you here, and we got to sit down. And he said, Walter's going to call you. And Walter called me when I was on my way to the Double Door to see Stella Star and this little band called The Killers that was opening for him.
At the Double Door?
At the Double Door.
Oh, my God.
And Walter said, what are you doing tomorrow? And I said, calling in sick. He said, yeah, we're going to book you a plane ticket. Come out. So I flew out to LA, like the 6 a.m. flight or whatever it was. Kevin and I sat down for about 2 hours. And he said, so you want to do this? And I said, are you offering me the job? And he said, yes. I said, all right, I want to do this. So when do you want to start? He's like, well, I needed you last Friday. So I gave my notice. I basically moved like a week later, sold whatever I could and packed everything else in a car and drove to LA. Worked for Kevin for a year.
And Kevin was top dog at House of Blues at that time, right? He was overseeing all of the clubs.
Yeah, so you had Alex running the concert amphitheater division, and you had Kevin running all the clubs. And that was when it was still 7 House of Blues clubs.
They were starting to do package tours, and Kevin was in the center of all of that. Like, all things that ran through that brand was his baby.
Correct. So Krebs had left. McGuigan replaced Krebs. Randy Feiberger moved back into corporate to work with Kevin on that particular concept. Alan Sinkowski was working in the brand's sponsorship department, and that was like, you know, Jim Beam, PlayStation, and it was, you know, the era of $15, $20 tickets, so guarantees were like $5,000.
Right.
So if you had 20 dates at $5,000, it was $100,000, and you go, we can give you another $20,000 if you let PlayStation be the sponsor of the tour.
Right. That's basically paying for the bus.
Correct. So Randy and Kevin were doing that together. And then Elise Rogers.
Dance Hall Crashers.
Yeah. She then came in shortly thereafter. And then after a year of working with McWigan, Kevin asked me to come back and work with him, Elise, and Randy. And then Amy Trenley actually came over and started working in marketing with Elise. And then that was, 2006, August of 2006. They told everyone, they had like a, town hall essentially. And they said, Live Nation has acquired us. I think it was a shock to a lot of people because we were like
Mortal Enemies.
independent.
Yeah.
It was right around that time too. Michael came over.
Rapino?
Yeah. And addressed the whole staff and talked about why Live Nation had acquired House of Blues. And that was like my first exposure to seeing Michael speak. It's pretty impressive.
Like that moment where Vince McMahon bought WCW. It's just like mind blowing.
So that was in August. And then Greg Trojan, who was the CEO, Joe Kazarowski, who was the CFO, Kevin all said, we got to get you out in the field because we're not really sure exactly, how the integration is going to work. They moved me back to Chicago in October. And then in December, the deal was officially closed. And Mark Campana called me. Mark and I didn't know each other. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing because 13 years ago, but he said something to the tune of like, you're employee number one. Do you know what that means? I thought maybe I was the first person getting fired. But he said, you're gonna be the first House of Blues employee to move over to a Live Nation field office. So, excited to work with you. I've heard really good things about you from, Michael and Kevin and some others. So we want you to be in the office on Monday. And I think Tom Loudermilk was also, Belkin had asked him to move into the Live Nation Cleveland office right at the same time.
Crazy too, because he came from Promo West.
Yep.
And he was booking the Agora for some time.
Yep.
So it's like to go head to head against Michael and then suddenly be in his office, like mind blowing, right?
A lot of that.
I think if you ask Tom would say like Michael Belkin was awesome to him. Like, and it really worked out well. And like, as I've gotten to know Michael Belkin over the years, like he's a great guy.
And great hair.
Great hair.
Great hair.
So I worked in Chicago for a year and a half. At that time, I was working with Yerke and Mary Claire, and we were doing shows at House of Blues. Yerke was doing the Congress Theater right when like Eddie Carranza had taken that over. And I can't remember if Yerke might have been doing it before Eddie even. And then it obviously, AEG took it over. C3, I think, had it at one point. They ripped out all the seats. It became like a viable competitor to the Aragon. But Jason Wright was the lead booker in that office. And Jason had basically, I had said to him, I want to learn the amphitheater and arena side, and he let me start working on offers and scalings and all of that. And then Joe Litvag had offered me a job to go to AEG Kansas City. And I didn't have a contract at the time. And then I'd spoken to Mark and Jason and Michael and ultimately decided to stay. And then, Mark had helped put me in front of Jeff Wills, who I'd interacted with briefly. And Jeff had talked to me about maybe coming over there. I was interviewing for like House of Blues, San Diego and Anaheim, which Todd Miller and Brian Moore eventually got. And then Kevin was moving to New York. And we were talking about maybe me going to New York. I ended up staying put for the time being, and then an opportunity came up to go out in 2008 to LA and work with Ryan McElrath, and then Jason Garner was, the CEO at the time. I think the touring landscape at that time was Bruce Kapp, Brad Wavra, Faisal, Taki, Renat, and Ryan. I think, and
wow.
that was the core group, and then there was a handful of other people.
So all these different people that you're talking about are in such different parts of the company. And the fact that you got to interact with all of them, just how big Live Nation is, regardless, it's just like all of these different directions, all of these different resources, all of these different places that you were able to touch, just really lends to your ability to like work within the system.
And I can name drop with the best of them. Right?
It's really funny though, if you go back in the Chicago story that you basically just told, at not one point did you mention Jam.
But I knew Mike LeMaistri and Nick Miller to some degree, and I always thought those guys were really good guys. I'd interact.
Yeah, Nick's great.
Yeah, there's a lot of people over there. that really good people. And I've developed a really good relationship with Arnie, the last 3 or 4 years. And
yeah, the competitiveness of Chicago, when you think about Don Sullivan coming out of there and some of the amazing buyers that have gone through that market, it's like you got to have your chops if you're going to compete in that market.
It's very, very true.
Okay, so how'd you wind up in Nashville?
So after 3 years in the touring division, Bob and Mark became the heads of the U.S.
Bob Rue and Mark
Campana. And they had said, to some degree, because I think in that era there was a talk of let's get all of our good young people to LA, and that was when we started our own ticketing company. Bob and Mark end up heading up the U.S., and the thing that Michael Rapino talks about a lot now is the decentralized business. That I think 2011 was kind of the thinking and the start of that focus. And so Larry Magid had left Philadelphia, I think 2009.
Left the company in Philadelphia, but he'll never leave Philadelphia.
Correct. I think Ben Whedon was the one who had to go and talk to Larry. So Larry left. Neil Jacobson had left Philly at that point and was in Florida. And so Jeff Gordon had become the head of that office. And then as they were doing they had a couple different things. Jeff and I had a relationship from my time in touring. I'd grown up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So Jeff had asked me if I would have any interest moving to Philly, and then he offered me that job near the end of 2010, and so I moved to Philly to work with Jeff and that whole team, and then I was there for 4 years.
Jeff Gordon.
So near probably 2.5 years into that job, I had a couple opportunities to leave. Alex Hodges had asked me if I'd want to come to Niederlander. Rick Mueller had asked me if I wanted to come to AEG.
It's good to be wanted.
It's stressful though, And then Jim Glancy and I were having a conversation about me coming to Bowery Presents, which is pre-acquisition. And then actually at that time, that was when Canada was also separating out of North American concerts, it's now U.S. concerts. So Canada kind of became its own thing. And Paul Hagenson and Riley O'Connor had asked me if I had any interest in maybe coming up to Toronto. So in all those conversations, my parents were living in Clarksville, and Mark Campana and Bob Rue had asked me what my thoughts on Nashville were, and that there was this potential RFQ coming from the city for a property called West Riverfront Amphitheater, which is now Ascend Amphitheater. And we got deeper into those conversations, and I really thought Nashville, I remember saying to them at the time, I thought Nashville was one of the fastest growing cities in America. And when I looked at what they showed me, what they believed would be the amphitheater, and I don't remember if we had the RFQ at that time or not, I thought it was a really special project. And ultimately that was what I ended up doing, was moving to Nashville.
And that's 2013, 14?
So I made the commitment, I think it was December of 2012. And then I stayed in it was December 2013. And then I stayed in Philadelphia all the way until November of 14. So that was part of the deal, was stay in Philadelphia. And then, you might move in September, might be January. Let's just kind of get through the process. So there was a team of us that worked on, so it was like Larry Weathers, Bob, myself, John Neiman, Carl Adams, that we ultimately, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a few other people, but we had all worked on the RFQ response for West Riverfront Amphitheater.
So when you guys came to Nashville, at one point, Live Nation didn't have much of a presence here, which is hard to conceive of now, because when you look at the market, you guys have done an amazing build out here, but it seems like Rue and Rapino had decided we're going to plant a flag in Nashville and really come strong and Ascent and really kind of help lead that door in. But AEG had, their own amphitheater at the time out in the outskirts, which you guys are booking, right?
Well, we did it the last 3 years, and then so that was the Woods at Fontenelle.
Right.
So Fontenelle being Barbara Mandrell's old estate, and they called it the Woods Amphitheater. And then there was a name and title sponsorship for 4 years with Carl Black Chevy.
Yeah. Is it still Carl Black Chevy?
Well,
technically,
last year the partners, so
Greg,
Mark Oswald being the main point, but Dale Morris had some involvement, and then I don't know the whole group beyond. Mark was the day-to-day and had a team of people, but they sold to a developer resort company out of Chicago. So we stopped taking holds last year. They were trying to get that deal done. And so technically it is not an actively programmed space, but there is some ability and or a potential appetite to do one or two larger events if it makes sense, like the Kid Rock Fish Fry, which we aren't going to do this year.
So it's an option still for a limited point of view run.
I think it's still an option. I think there's still, a handful of things that have to happen with the city council person, the current ownership group, basically the neighbors.
Right. You move into this market and you guys have done an amazing job building it out, because from what was basically an AEG city when you got here is certainly not that anymore.
So the landscape was Jason Wright, who I worked for in Chicago, when they decided to close Starwood. And I believe Jason followed Allie Harnell when Allie left, Clear Channel and went when Louis left as well. Jason was booking Starwood, and then they decided to sell it. So then he moved to Chicago, and then essentially that shuttered the local office. So Live Nation has always had like a presence in Nashville because Brian O'Connell and his team, obviously have been doing country touring for 15, 20 years, and then obviously expanded into Country Nation and the festivals. So there was always a Live Nation staff here, but there was not a local promoter office. So I think with the idea of Ascend Amphitheater potentially being, a tentpole for reopening the local office, that was kind of the thinking. And then also, huge growth city, industry town.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know if anyone could have predicted how big of an industry town it is now, 5, 6, 7 years later, but it's dramatically changed.
Yeah, we should just talk about the competitive landscape of what Nashville was to touring. There's Broadway, there's honky tonks, but I don't think it was a town that was so programmed. There's something happening here literally every night of the week. I mean, multiple shows. Let's just take example last year when we had Jay-Z, Taylor Swift, and a myriad of other things. I mean, the amount of gross that just came through the city in a single weekend is staggering.
Well, when we opened up Ascend, we had Eric Church, Dolly Parton was playing the Ryman. There was someone playing the arena. I'm blanking on who it was. I had to look it up. And then the Sounds had a sold out baseball game.
Yeah.
And that was like where everyone went.
You forget the size of this market. It's not an A for the amount of shows and the volume and everything that comes through here.
600 or 700,000 people.
So
it's not even that big.
Davidson County, it's 690,000 people.
But there's not a tour that will skip Nashville now.
No, I mean, and it used to be Nashville was lucky if it made the top 25 or 30, and now Bridgestone, I think in Polestar data is number 5 or 6 in terms.
It's always a top 10.
Yeah.
Thinking about it, and you're responsible now because you've become president over the market. You oversee here, which actually is an amazing accomplishment at your age. There's not a ton of presidents in the system.
Are you the youngest president?
I think that I might have been
at the time, right?
At the time. But Grant, Brittany, Kelly, we're all the same, basically age. I think they might be a little bit younger than me.
You're aging out, man.
I'm getting old.
Okay, so you become president. When did that happen, and what led up to that?
That happened when I had made the decision to move to Nashville. I remember Bob and Mark asking me what my title should be, and I don't remember I didn't want a title in my contract is the way I remember it, and I felt like there were some senior level people out there who were VPs and senior VPs, and I thought it might create some conflict with some of my colleagues and or just that it might be an issue. So
it's not like the military though, where a president can make somebody do push-ups. Wait, can you?
That's against HR policy. But I think it just ended up showing up in my contract, and I remember having a conversation about it and being very non-committal to asking for anything for the reasons that I mentioned, and I think it ended up being as part of my contract. So
you actually tried to avoid being president just by title?
I honestly always tried to operate under the idea of titles shouldn't matter. What the work that you do should define your reputation, and that was kind of my philosophy. I think that there's a flip side argument to it where you may get some meetings externally or outside of the industry, and that's an important title to be able to interface with the mayor's office or the heads of the CBC or all of those other people, particularly when you're, 34 years old, which is what I was when I moved here. To gain some extra credibility with that title was probably very helpful. So if I look back on it now, I'm appreciative of it because I think it opened up some doors that maybe might have not been as easily opened.
It's a crazy market with a lot of competitors. AC comes in, NS2 comes in, we pop in from time to time, all within the same company. You got touring that's running stuff through here. On top of that, obviously, AEG's doing shows, and then you've got networks producing random events out of nowhere and sponsors. You've got more managers and agents showing up at your shows than probably any other market besides Chicago or New York, because people come to the Nashville shows even if just to cover them, even if they don't live here. So the transparency, you basically have to have a clean, open kitchen like a restaurant where you just constantly know you're being watched by everybody. Does that add some pressure, or you're just used to it now?
I don't know if it adds pressure per se as much as it adds extra time commitment that you can't get around if you're...
Because you got to be at the show if the manager's there.
You have to. We still have a pretty relatively small staff for an industry town. So, and I think that there's an expectation of the agent or manager always wanting the promoter at the show. And whether they live here or they live in New York and LA, to your point, I'd say 9 out of 10 times the responsible agent and the day-to-day manager are showing up for the Nashville show because they, unless they have an office here where they can get coverage on it, like it's just too important to not show up.
So, you're here too, Luke. You're out all the time. That's part of being in Nashville. There's showcases that you got to go support your agents when they got an act playing at 5:00. You got to help fill the room. You're going out to dinners. You're seeing people are always visiting. You've always got things like CMA going on. Being in the city, is that a more time commitment than any of the other cities you guys have lived in the past?
What I enjoy about Nashville is definitely the 6:30 showcases compared to the 9:30 or 11 p.m. start time where you're rolling into a studio at 11 p.m. Everything here it really is like a 9 to kind of 6:30 town when it comes down to like.
So that's set up so you can get home and cut off for the day unless you got a show to cover.
See the kids, go see the dog, do your garden, whatever you want to do in Franklin, and that's, I think, creates a better balance than LA where you were constantly out until all hours of the morning the next day doing stuff here. And I do enjoy that balance aspect of it, but there is something literally every night. So
well, and I think the flip side of it is in LA, everything's so spread out. So it's difficult at times to go from the Forum to the Greek. Right. But I'm sure Brett Gallagher, Rich Bess, and Brian Smith, Greg Siegel, those guys have done it, I'm sure, on multiple occasions, probably even like last week.
Right.
But everything
for Uber Blade,
everything here is 15 minutes away. So it's very accessible to kind of make it out to everything.
It's not hard to run to the Ryman over to Sen, back over to Gaylord.
Well, I can recall like an agent who had moved here from New York like a year ago. They had gone to a show at Ascend or the Ryman, and they got home like 15 minutes after they had left the show, and they're like, this is incredible. But I think that also, if you talk to tours that come through, what happens is because it's so accessible and easy, everyone shows up. So it makes managing the artist guest list or, the industry requests come in, it makes it a lot harder because it's easy to get around. And as a result,
people pop in for half a show.
Everybody wants to come, which is good, but also you're challenged as it relates to inventory or fire codes or any of those things. So
reality.
Yes.
So let's talk about some of the stuff that you're working on in here in Nashville. It's not just Ascend Amphitheater, which you came here, principally to open up. You're doing shows at Bridgestone. You're doing shows at the Ryman. You're doing shows at War Memorial. There's
stadium shows now.
So
what's on the docket for you?
Well, so I guess, and kind of to the point of what you asked earlier, like when you look at the data of what we were doing, particularly after the separation of theaters and clubs versus U.S. concerts or North American concerts. So Nashville rolled under Atlanta, and, Peter, Amy, and Adam, I think they all did a good job, but also there wasn't that focus or that spotlight on it.
Somebody has to be here because the agents are here.
Right. And, so I think we were doing on average about 14 to 16 shows in the marketplace. And I think we either have played or currently on sale like 155 or 157 right now up into this point this year. So it'll be upwards of like 200. And look, the majority of that was the arena. So that was about, call it 100,000 tickets. Last year we sold 800,000 tickets. So, and we want to keep trending upwards, right?
It's not just Nashville too, right? You ever see the state, right?
I'd say 95% is Nashville because we made a decision at the middle or end of last year that Memphis, because of where it sits geographically, you have South Haven, which is Mississippi. So when we go by states, and there was from some of our partners there, an interest in making sure that that was one market. So ultimately, Memphis is now Russell's.
Okay.
And then it would also then include Knoxville, but now AC is part of the family, and Knoxville is where they're based. And so we'll either do the small handful of arena shows. They do some arena shows. We'll work on shows together there. But, they have, the clubs and the theaters in that marketplace. And then you have Chattanooga would be your next biggest market, right? And then, if you look AC, Chris Cobb and Josh Blue, they have the Signal, right? Rob McNichol works on that. When you start breaking it down, we go 690,000 people in Metro. You go down, now you have Knoxville. Memphis was the largest. Nashville became the largest a year and a half ago. Then it's Knoxville. Then it's Chattanooga. And I think the next largest city after that is Johnson City. So when you put that all in perspective of...
Not many arena shows in Bristol, Tennessee.
The Speedway. So when you kind of put that in perspective, and then you think about what has happened with Nashville, I'd say 95% of our focus right now is the Nashville market, right? So to answer your question, we started with Ascend, then we got into a conversation where, Mark Oswald and his group had wanted us to be involved in Fontenelle. We wanted to do it too. We thought it could be a complementary venue to Ascend, given a 4,500 capacity versus 6,800. Now we're opening, we talked about how that has gone away now. So we're doing the Quarry down in Williamson County, the Greystone Quarry. So that will be roughly 7,500 seats. The renderings, most people are drawing the natural conclusion of Red Rocks.
Right.
Smaller version, taps into Williamson County. Rick and Nancy, who are the husband and wife who own it, amazing partners, like very smart, very hardworking, like tech background and an events background for them. And, that'll open next year. So we're really excited about that. And then, stadium shows, I believe the stadium history in Nashville is U2 at Vanderbilt, Dave Matthews at Vanderbilt, One Direction at Nissan. And then, Louis started doing Chesney. But I think even prior to, Taylor, when I first moved here, was doing 2 Bridgestones. And then obviously she's done the stadium now. So this year we didn't do any stadium shows, but we're doing 1 or 2 on average, generally speaking.
Yeah. Before we let you go, do you have any goals for the future? Where you're trying to go?
I think we've done a good job at Nashville so far. I think there's a lot of other things that we want to accomplish. And, ultimately the goal is on the artist side, help them maximize our earnings, give them great hard ticket platforms, particularly for the local business unit, for them to do that and just work through that development plan with our guys and try and get to that place.
Good stuff. Nashville President of Live Nation, Brian Traeger, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, guys.
Traeger is the fucking man. You gotta love him. So stoked. We finally had him here on Promoter 101.
Fresh news, boat shoes, and interviews.
Only on
Promoter 101.
The quote of the week comes to us from Harvey Specter. Ever love someone so much you would do anything for them? Yeah? Well, make that someone yourself and do whatever the hell you want. Kind of a fun quote this week, Luke.
I like that a lot, Dan.
I thought you might.
2019 is the year of self-care, and that is my motto. I'm getting that fucking tattooed.
If you do, I'll pay for it. I'd love to see that happen.
Too many words, I think.
I'll up the ante. I will donate $1,000 to Music Cares on top of paying for the tattoo if you're willing to do it.
Wow. I'll have to consider that bet. I don't know if I want something from cable on my body, but let's think of another thing that we would gamble on that would go to the great cause of Music Cares, and I will seriously consider it.
Connor just said that he would do it, and I think we should honor it. Will you own that?
Yeah, fuck yeah, I'll do it.
So Connor says he'll do it. I think this is a great thing.
I'll do it for Music Cares.
Let's do it. Let's set it up. We'll live stream it, and then we'll kick $1,000 to Music Cares in Connor's name.
Fuck yeah.
Luke, since you're not willing to do it, will you match me if Connor does it?
I'll match you if Connor does it.
Look at that. Raising money for Music Cares right here on Promoter 101. I think we should do some more of that, figuring out how to help Music Cares, Luke. I think maybe we could figure that out. Good people.
Hi there, this is Jody Goodman from Live Nation San Francisco, Northern California, and I am on Promoter 101 with Steiny in the house.
Hey, that concludes our broadcast today. Thank you so much for tuning in, for listening to this podcast. Thanks for our awesome guests today. From AEG Presents in the Rocky Mountains, Mr. Adam Stroul. Sincere personal thank you to my friend and our friend of this podcast, Mr. Brian Traeger, for coming on. Looking forward to hearing more about Old MacDonald and golfing the Pacific Northwest with you, buddy.
Hey, we'll return this Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Greenwich Mean Time, that's midnight. You can join us next week when our featured guest will be Adam Stroul, talking about competing in the Mile High City from Cervantes to Red Rocks. Until then, we're wishing you sold-out shows for the week to come. Cheers. Call your mother.
This is Charles Attell, C3 Presents, and I'm on Promoter 101.
Ba-da-ba-ba, ba-da.